Hello and welcome to Carnivorist Chats. My name is James, your host. I started this podcast to help other folks share their own healing stories and to interview thought leaders and experts in the carnivore, keto, and low oxalate space. Before we begin, I'd like to give a shout out to Equip Foods and the Carnivore Bar. As an affiliate, you can use the link in the show notes to get a discount on their products when you check out using the code Carnivorist. Thanks in advance for listening, subscribing, and any likes or shares. And now, on with the podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Carnivorist Chats. It's James, your host. I am super excited to have this guest joining me today on the show. This guest is profoundly impactful in my own journey, and I will explain why later on, but has also been so impactful on so many other folks' journey that have found a way out of vegetarianism and vegan diets to adding animal foods back in. The author is an advocate. She's an activist. And she's just an all-around cool human being. Lierre Keith, welcome to Carnivorous Chats.
Well, thanks for having me on. That was a very sweet introduction.
Well, I really meant everything that I said, Lierre. I was mentioning to you offline that I wish I had found your book when I, in 2014, made my foray into the vegan diet, which lasted 6 years, and my health went off a cliff, and the listeners know that.
Yeah.
However, since reading your book and having read it a couple of times now, it has been tremendously helpful for me to just reinforce the decision that I made to add animal foods back on. Not that gaining my health back wasn't enough of a decision anyhow,
right.
But you do wrestle as an ex-vegan like myself and yourself with some of the things that had been ingrained into you during that time in your life. So what I wanted to start out with, Lierre, if it's okay with you, is just an overview of the impetus on writing the vegetarian myth. Specifically, I know you have other books out there. Why did you feel it necessary at that time? 2009, I believe it was when you first wrote it. Just an incredible read. And if you could share with the listeners what was the impetus behind it and sort of some of the things that transpired.
Well, I had been a vegan for just about 20 years when I stopped. And like most of us, my health had failed catastrophically. And some of that is just permanent damage. You don't do it this long and get away unscathed. So, but it was a hard moment to realize that I was wrong about pretty much everything that I thought. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners know this, it's just everything collapses on you. Like you don't understand. It's like your place in the cosmos doesn't make any sense anymore. Like you just have, it's like there's no steady ground. There's just nothing stable. And that's very hard. So it took a year or two for me to sort of climb out of that. And I found really good information that was extremely helpful. I had the local Weston Price Foundation people were great. And I, found I was on some Facebook, this is before Facebook, I guess we used to have online forums. I guess those are all gone now, but I found some really good forums for people who were sort of in a similar situation and were trying to understand, what is the proper nutrition for the human template. And a lot of people already had really good answers for me. So it was all completely different than what completely on the opposite end of what I thought, being a vegan was the right thing. So all of that I had to reinvestigate. And then I had all these larger questions too about, well, what is agriculture and why did people start doing it? And in fact, was this a good thing? Maybe in fact, this is where the problem starts. And so all of this is like sort of, swirling around in my brain. And then there was just the sort of how horrible it was for me to have to take that first bite of meat. And that was very traumatizing. It took months for that just to fade and just become sort of normal. It took a long time because really, it's like being in a cult, like for some of us. I mean, it really is. So it was really hard to get back out of that. So then, you sort of put your worldview back together, and I saw all the ways that I was wrong when I was a vegan, and I'm very clear that it wasn't the ethical stance that was wrong. Like the values that I was trying to embody are exactly right, and really those are the values that we need to get to the world that we want. It's just that I didn't have enough information to make the correct choice. And this is why the vegans hate me, is because I'm not giving up that hill. So we're playing king of the castle up here, like who's right? And I think they would just be able to dismiss me a lot more easily if I was just to say, oh yeah, animals are stupid. Who cares? Do whatever you want to them. They don't count. And I don't say that. Like, I'm still claiming the same moral ground. I'm just saying, you don't have full information here. You think you do, but you don't. And if you can listen to me for 15 minutes, I can walk you through this. And I ended up doing that over and over again because, of course, everywhere you go in life, you're going to bump into these people, especially in the sort of world that I live in. Everybody is still, especially the young ones, they're trying to be vegetarian, they're trying to be vegan, and they're really suffering. And like in the first 2 minutes of the conversation, they'll be like, "Oh, every time I eat soy, the stomach ache is so horrible." I'm like, you're already telling yourself what you already know. You don't even have to have this conversation with me. You know this food is killing you. And they're exhausted and they're starving and they're desperate and they don't know why. Like, why isn't this working? This is supposed to work. So after a while, after a few years of that, I got honestly tired of having that conversation over and over again. It's like, yeah, I can reach them one by one, and sometimes we'll be sitting there for 2 hours, and I do basically talk them around. I mean, they get it if I lay it all out, but the thing is, we don't have slogans. We have actual information, and it takes a while to absorb all that information. And it's from a lot of different fronts because you've got the nutritional part, you've got the environmental part, you've got the sort of moral ethical part, and then you've got the political part. So all of these, I have an answer to, but I can't do it in slogans. I mean, they've got meat is murder. It's a great slogan. We don't have anything like that. It's like, yeah, I can't do it in a soundbite. This is actual information, and you are actually going to have to grapple with it, if you want to understand what's really going on the planet. And then it's going to take time because it's going to affect pretty deeply. I mean, the thing about being a vegan is it's never just what you eat, right? It becomes who you are. And this is why it's so hard to engage with this counter information, is because it feels like a threat to your very self, your sense of self. And it's very scary. I have had so many people say to me, I got your book somehow. Somebody sent it to them or they bought it, and then it sat on my shelf for 2 years. I was too afraid to pick it up. And I would have been that person. I would have been very, very afraid to engage with this. Why are we afraid to read a book? Now I know if I feel afraid to read a book, I need to just read that book, you know? Because if I'm wrong about something, this is the grown up approach. I need to engage with it because one of two things will happen. Either I will be challenged, and that's good because then I can try to figure out, well, okay, what information is missing here? What did I not know that I now know? Is this information true? How do I know it's true? Like what backs this up? What doesn't back it up? What else can what do I need to grapple with here to find this out? And then you're either wrong about something, so then you can correct your course, and that's really good. Or no, this person is wrong in this book, and that's okay. I can make an argument against it. So I don't need to embrace this, but it was good to be challenged. It was good to find out, like, was I right or was I wrong? Is this person right or wrong? That's just being an adult with a mind that still is like functioning, rather than closed off. We can see around the world what happens when people go fundamentalist. It's never pretty. And I don't want to be that person. I don't want to be so ideologically bound that I can't actually engage with other human beings. And part of that is just for myself. It was not pleasant being that person, but also, I mean, kind of on a broad scale, that's the only hope we have. So for me, that's, I needed to be able to do that. And so it got really exhausting having to do this one-on-one. And I kept thinking, if I wrote this all down, it would actually be easier because then I could just hand them a book. And it's not that I want to stop having those conversations because I really do care about these people. I was them. I know how bad they feel. So that's always going to be a thing that I do. But it's a lot easier just to hand somebody a book and say, on your own terms, read this. It may take you 6 months to get through it. You're going to have a lot of questions when you're done with it. You may have to read it twice. I'm always available by email. You're welcome to reach out to me again if you want to discuss some of this. But I think at this point, there's so many other good books about these subjects and sort of, adjacent subjects. If you really want to know about the farming part of it, the agriculture part, there's so many good books. If you really want to understand the nutrition part of it, lots of good books now. When I jumped into this at age 16, it was like, what year was that? 1981. I mean, there was nothing. And I didn't grow up in a rural area, so I didn't have any way to know that all of this information was incomplete or just completely wrong. I just didn't know. I had no idea where my food came from. So, I lived in this very sort of urban, suburban environment. It was all cement, a couple of big trees, but that was it. I didn't know. I had no idea what farming did to the planet. I had no idea that agriculture was the problem. So anyway, all of which is to say, I wrote the book because I wanted to reach a certain population. I wanted to reach particularly sort of young, um, very engaged, politically aware, uh, those people who really want to change the world. And I want to get to them before the vegans do, because if the vegans get them, they're going to waste a decade or two doing something that is utterly useless for the planet and will do nothing but hurt their bodies. And it's just pointless. There's no reason to suffer. This doesn't work on any level. And I want to get to them before it's too late, because once they're in, it's much, much harder to pull them out. If I can get to them first with this information, then we've got every chance in the world that they'll understand this on the first try. And I don't want them to get hurt. They don't need to end up like I did with three autoimmune diseases and a degenerating spine. Like, this doesn't need to happen to anybody. So that's one of the main reasons. And then just on a slightly larger kind of level, I really want the people who care most about the planet to understand the actual damage. I want them to understand the nature of the problem and the scale of the problem. And as long as they're stuck in vegan world, they can't. They can't engage with it because agriculture is the answer. And I have very bad news for them. Agriculture is the problem. So, we're going to be at loggerheads until they can break out of this a little bit and start to listen. And I want their passion. I want them to be putting it in the right place, because it's not too late for this planet, but we don't have a lot of time left to waste with these solutions that are just completely off. So I really want to reach them as well. And that is, mostly environmental movement. Most of them have bought into this. They just don't know better. So that was kind of, the sort of the two groups of people that I was trying to reach when I wrote the book. So I don't know. Has it been successful? I mean, I get plenty of hate mail, so I'm definitely poking somebody, but I also get those really sort of heartfelt emails from people who, it helped. It did help. They were stuck in this. Their health was decaying. They were degenerating by the day. They had no idea why, and they didn't know what to do about it. And they sort of, in their heart of hearts, knew they were going to have to give this up, but they couldn't find a way out. And if I helped somebody do that, it was worth writing for sure, because I was that person, and it was a really hard day. So that's my story.
Lierre, I just want to say thank you to you publicly for writing this book. And as I mentioned to you prior, that without exception, all of the past vegans that I have interviewed have cited vegetarian myth as being so profoundly impactful and bringing them back to a semblance of health or changing their mindset. So we just want to say thank you to you for your advocacy in this area. Interestingly enough, I had Jane Buxton on, who is the author of The Great
Oh yeah,
Plant-Based
the
Con.
plant-based one, yeah.
And her impetus for writing the plant-based con, obviously very similar to yours, that the vociferous noise that was coming around that, ironically, same time that I was becoming vegan, 2014 to 16, Game Changers really spurred her on as well. And also the
Right.
fact, and we're going to get into that, is that she really wanted to protect especially the young women that were falling victim to this way of eating, that was coming from eating disorders and hiding
Yep.
behind the guise of vegan and vegetarianism, hiding an eating disorder. So we're very thankful for her as well. But, let's dive into, Jane eloquently calls it the three-legged stool, that the arguments that prop themselves up. And in your book, it's very similar. And the first argument, as we sort of hinted at, is that morality argument that can be very, very challenging to sort of dissuade them from. And I know that because, again, I was wrapped in this ideological mind view that this was the best thing for the planet, the best thing for my health, the best thing for the animals. And it was very, very difficult to come out of. But what, as you mentioned to earlier, was that, meat is murder, but the reality is that monocropping is murder, as you so eloquently put it. So talk to us about this agricultural sort of intertwinement into what happened to our health, and if you can give some examples of what happened to your health as a vegan and vegetarian, and just let the listeners know how did we come to this place.
So for our first 2 million years on this planet, we were not monsters and destroyers. We took our nourishment from inside living biotic communities. So that living community was left to continue. And the complex relationships that make life possible are so, they talk about the web of life, but it is a web that is so complicated. It'd be impossible for our brains to ever conceive how complicated this is. But, on a very simple level, you want to just take it down to the most simplest kinds of functions, I guess, that it provides us with oxygen. It provides us with food. On the surface of the planet, it makes soil so that everything else can survive on the land. That's not true for the ocean, obviously, but for land life, soil is what makes it all possible. That's sort of, the base substance from which everything else grows. And what makes that happen is there's this miracle called photosynthesis. So plants are the people that do that. They can take the sunlight and they can turn it into matter, essentially. Um, and it's an amazing thing. And that's the sun is the energy source for all of it, and plants are the people who make that little miracle happen. The rest of us are dependent on all of that in one way or another. Now, the plants don't do it alone, and this is where, of course, it gets really interesting and complicated, because, of course, you've got the mycorrhiza, so you've got all this stuff under the surface of the soil that we can't see with the naked eye. I mean, we had no idea any of this was going on until microscopes were invented, right? And somebody actually looked. But 1 tablespoon of soil can contain over 1 billion living creatures. So I want people to understand like the depth of life that is here. 1 tablespoon, you can just picture 1 spoon. Over 1 billion creatures are in there. You can't see any of them, but they are the ones that are doing that basic work of life, because they're either enhancing what plants do or they're degrading. So as things die, they need to be broken down so that the nutrients are then available. So we have all these different cycles on the planet, and the bacteria are really the creatures that are doing that basic work of life on a moment to moment, just moment to moment. That's who's making it happen. And we don't even know anything, until 100 years ago. We didn't even know they existed. So, and it was a big freak out when people figured it out, because they're not in the Bible. How is it possible? And so people like Darwin really had to grapple with this. Like, there's this entire world that's not mentioned. Like, oh no, now what's going to happen? And a lot of people just wouldn't even listen to him and other scientists like him, because it's like, this can't be true. It's too crazy. Pasteur had the same problem. We're like, this world cannot be possible. He's like, no, I've seen it, and this is true. Anyway, so this huge complexity. The problem with agriculture is it destroys all of it. That's the problem. It's like literally how we've destroyed the planet. So 10,000 years ago, in a few places around the globe, people start doing this completely other way of life. And it's called agriculture. It's called farming. And so we have to understand in very brute terms, you take a piece of land, you clear every last living creature off it, just gone. You clear it off, and then you plant it just for humans. So we've got some major problems here. The first is that this is mass extinction. All those plants and animals have nowhere else to go. And this is why right now, every single day, 200 species go extinct. And tomorrow it'll be another 200. And the day after that, it'll be another 200. And there's going to be nothing left by the time we're done. And I want people to understand the seriousness of this. We can't make, even if you don't care about those other creatures, which frankly is sociopathic, but let's pretend they don't even exist to you as moral creatures, fine, whatever. Where are you going to get your oxygen? I'm like really desperate to know where you think this is going to come from. 2 out of 3 animal breaths are made possible by the plankton in the ocean. They are the ones who do that for us, and they are tiny little creatures. Some of them are more plants, some of them are more animals, but they float around in the ocean. They can't really propel themselves, so they're dependent on currents and whatnot. But that's what they do, is they produce oxygen. So the oceans are now so acidic from all the carbon that's been released that they're having a very hard time repopulating themselves. And when they go down, we're going down with them. This is very scary. I want people to understand. You may not care about plankton because they're tiny and they're green and they're small and you can't really, you need to care about plankton. Okay. And I, just as an aside, there's at the cathedral, the St. John Cathedral in New York City, they have every year they have they do the blessing of the animals that's based on the St. Francis of Assisi, was the big animal guy. If you into your Catholic saints. And so they do this thing where they do the blessing, and they the very first creature that they bring to the altar for blessing is the plankton. And I just think that's really cool that they figured that out. So they bring a bowl. And then they have like bigger and bigger, and it sort of ends with an elephant, I think. I don't know, the poor elephant. I hope it's not in captivity. But anyway, there are people who know this, but this is where we get our oxygen. So what does agriculture do? It destroys all of it, like down to the bacteria, the mycorrhiza. Everything gets killed when you plow. You clear that land. What land is supposed to have on it is permanent plant cover. So we call these perennials. These are perennial plants. And they're perennial because they live many, many years. And just use your common sense. A tree could not grow as big as a tree in one season, right? Now I'm contrasting this with the annual plants. Annuals, they have very big seed heads because they only have one way to reproduce, and that's their seed. Most other plants that are long-lived, that are perennials, they can reproduce in a number of ways. So I'm looking outside right now my window, and I see redwood trees, and I see blackberries. I see native blackberries, and I see invasive Himalayan blackberries. And for the redwood trees, they put out pine cones. That's one way that they reproduce, is they have these, seeds essentially. But they also can sprout up from roots in the ground. They can sprout up from stumps. So trees that have fallen for whatever reason, new trees can grow from that. And the main way that redwoods actually reproduce, and this is fascinating, is when redwood trees get really old, they fall over. So eventually the day comes, and they're thousands of years old when they do this, but eventually, age happens and they just fall over. And they have what are called burls on the surface of the trunk. So when they're standing up, the burls are just kind of there. And you see there's like these sort of big lumpy kind of bits that sort of, are extended out from the trunk. And a lot of woodworkers love these. If you cut off the burl, which I don't recommend, but if you do that, there's incredible patterns inside, like it's all swirly. So you can make like beautiful inlay. And so they're very prized by different woodworky people, crafty people. But anyway, the tree falls. And then once there's moisture and whatnot going on along the decaying trunk, those burls spring to life. And that's where the new redwoods come from. So when I walk out in my forest, that's what I see is, all the time you get and then there's the burl, and then that's where the new trees are going to populate from. But it has 4 different ways to make more redwoods, right? Annuals have this one way, and it's the giant seed. So everything goes into that seed. Now, annuals have a role. The planet recognizes, life recognizes that bare soil is a disaster for the planet, and it is. It's a biological emergency for the planet. So once that ground is cleared for some reason, so like a fire, a flood, an earthquake, a landslide, something terrible happens, and the land it's bare, and it's going to be bare for a while. And this is when the annuals have their moment. So those giant seeds that annuals produce have laid dormant in the soil, sometimes for centuries. And now all of a sudden there's no competition because the perennials have been cleared away. There's no roots, there's nothing in the way. So boom, up they sprout. And now you're going to have this patch of land that's covered in usually very, brightly flowered, lovely annual plants. And they're brightly flowered because they're attracting the bees and the pollinators. That's what that's for, to make more seeds. And then eventually, the perennials will knit back together and cover that land completely, and it will be gone. But those seeds will then again lay dormant for the next emergency. So this is how nature deals with this emergency of bare ground. The problem is that we as humans went ahead and decided to make this emergency happen year after year after year on every piece of land that we could. There's nothing left for agriculture to take. It took it all. So, anything where agriculture could happen is gone. And this is, a roundabout way of saying 98% of the world's forests and 99% of the world's prairies are gone. And they're gone because of agriculture, because humans got really addicted to these foods. And those annual grains made us do their will by sort of locking into the pleasure centers in our brain, and we were willing to do it for them. So there's this great quote from Richard Manning where he says that the annual grasses, got us to do this for them. And we waged a war against the perennial grasses and the forests, and we won. And it was, all on behalf of the annual grasses. And so here we are, completely addicted to wheat and corn and rice and whatever, destroying our health and our way of life, and ultimately our planet. So just to give you another number here, one season of planting your basic annual crop, so wheat or soy or whatever, you can destroy 2,000 years of soil in one season. And anybody who doesn't believe me, just Google it, Dust Bowl. Go look at the pictures of the first day of the Dust Bowl in South Dakota, and you will see at the farms that lost all of their soil in one day. In one day, all that soil was gone. It's just this enormous cloud that moved across the continent and then across the ocean. It's all that soil. That soil was in places 12 feet deep when the Europeans got there, and it's just gone. There's nothing left. So this is the problem with agriculture. It's a drawdown. You're destroying your soil. Every single year that you do this, you're destroying your land. And then what? What are you going to do? So while that's happening, you're also creating this surplus. This is the problem. Other problem with agriculture is the surplus. And if it can be stored, it can be stolen. And if it can be stolen, you're going to need somebody to protect it. And those people are called soldiers. So agriculture makes that possible. It also makes it inevitable. So as you're drawing down, your population is exploding. Hunter-gatherers are very good at keeping their population at sustainable numbers. Agriculturists are terrible at it. There's this huge rise in population. You're drawing down the resources that your land base has, and eventually you're headed for this thing called collapse. There have been 34 civilizations, so 34 times people have decided we're going to make a whole way of life based on agriculture. All 34 have ended in collapse. Mostly they last until the soil gives out, so somewhere between 800 and 2,000 years. But eventually the soil is gone. And this is grim, but the last proteins in the cooking pots are always human, which is to say, people are starving and they go on to cannibalism. It's a terrible thing, but this is where it ends every time. And this is not actually intellectually challenging, right? If you take more trees than a forest can produce, eventually there'll be nothing left. It's the same. If you take more fish than a river can provide, eventually that river is going to be nothing but water and sorrow. It's the same with the soil. You're drawing down every single year. And you're also producing more and more people who need that soil more and more. And then it's gone. So this is why agricultural societies end up militarized, is because eventually you have to conquer your neighbors. You've used up your own stuff. You've taken all the trees, the fish, the water, the soil. It's all gone. You've either covered it in cement and stone, or, right outside the city are these decaying farms, which are running out of soil. There's no food. So you have to conquer people. You're either going to let the thing collapse and all starve, or you become militaristic. So this is the pattern of civilization. You've got this bloated power center. So like ancient Rome, just one example. And then you've got all the colonies, the conquered colonies. So you have to conquer your neighbors. So the whole northern part of all of that of Africa up into Egypt, all of it, that was the breadbasket for the Roman Empire. In fact, Egypt was considered the private property of the Roman emperor, because so much food came out of Egypt because of the Nile, because every year that the Nile would flood and bring down all those nutrients. So there was, always going to be at least some wheat coming out of Egypt. But if you interfered with the offloading of that food from Egypt as it was, shipped into Rome on boats, if you did anything to interfere with that process at the dock, it was summary execution. That's how important it was, because it had to feed the citizens of Rome. If the people weren't fed, there was going to be a revolt. There would be a revolution. So that was how they kept them all pacified. Was like, all right, well, here's at least your bread. So you see what happens. Like, this just snowballs into every kind of evil thing that we now are trying to stop on this planet. You've got slavery, you've got, militarism, you have genocide, you've got environmental destruction, you've got patriarchy. All of this comes as you decide to take up this crazy thing. And I love this quote from Colin Tudge he said at the London School of Economics, and he said, the real question isn't why anybody was slow to take up agriculture, but why anybody took it up at all, since it's so obviously beastly. And I just love that. But yeah, and it's backbreaking labor from, one end of the day to the other. And the only way for the ruling class to have leisure is to have slaves. So immediately with agriculture comes slavery. And again, once you have vast numbers of people in slavery, you're going to need these people called soldiers who are going to keep them there. So, once again, agriculture makes it makes it possible, but it also makes it inevitable, because you're going to have, in ancient Greece, for instance, in Athens, which is supposed to be, the birthplace of modern democracy, over 90% of the population was enslaved. That was the only way that they could have, the philosophers and the kings and all this, doing all their fun stuff in the Colosseum and the Colosseum's Rome, but the Parthenon, whatever. All of that stuff had to, to have that kind of leisure as in an agricultural society, somebody has to do the work. So by the year 1800, 3/4 of the human beings alive on this planet were living in some kind of serfdom, indenture, or out and out slavery. 3/4 of the population. Of course, you're going to need soldiers, because we're not going to put up with this otherwise. So that's the year 1800, and that's pretty much the beginning of the fossil fuel age. Now, we've forgotten this because we've been using fossil fuel to do all that labor ever since. But I can guarantee you, as peak oil, as we're declining now on that curve, we're going to remember this pretty soon, because we're going to have to, and it's not pretty. So I don't know. That's where we are. So this is the problem, right? This is vast. This has been going on for a long time. People have a hard time engaging with this, because it's not that it's that, like I said, intellectually challenging, but emotionally it can be quite challenging, because this is the basis of our culture. This is the only life we've ever known. So when you start asking people to question it, they're very confused. They're very confused. And then the vegans come in, right? So the vegans say, oh, it is so terrible to do these things to animals. And I agree, it is horrible. I don't think anybody can make an moral argument for factory farming in particular. And I just think we just set that off. Just we don't even need to discuss it. We just agree this is horrible. No sentient being should go through this. So then you have these questions about, all right, well, here's my plate, and I don't see a dead animal on it. Therefore, this must be the food that's peaceful and sustainable and kind and nice to animals. And this is the bad news. If what is on your plate is agricultural food, it's not just the death of one animal, it is the death of the entire planet. That's what you're eating when you eat agricultural foods. So it's a lot to ask people to absorb. But this is the problem. The agriculture is where all this starts. We're going to have to stop doing it if we're going to save our planet. And the vegans have just gone down they've gone down the wrong path entirely. Like they need to be grappling with the real problem here. And factory farming is a good place to start, but you have to keep going from there. And also like what made factory farming possible, because it didn't start till 1950, right? Before that had never been a pattern that people had used. It didn't make any sense to do it. Grain was too hard to come by. It was too expensive. You would never have done that. The whole point of having domesticated animals was that they ate things we didn't eat and they turned it into things we could eat. So they can eat corn stalks. They can eat all kinds of, banana peels. They can eat the part of the grain that we don't eat, which is most of it, because we're only eating the seed. There's all the rest of that stuff. And it's cellulose. And cows, for instance, any ruminant, that's what they do. They take cellulose and they turn it into meat and milk. And so that's why domesticated animals are a thing, is because they take things we don't eat and they turn it into things we do eat. And that's just called getting food for most of us. So that's pre-1950. 1950, what's happened? World War II is over. This thing called the Haber-Bosch process has been invented. And what this meant was that this is actually in World War I. They figured out how to take gas and oil and extract the nitrogen from it. It's very energy intensive, but it can be done. And they needed it to make bombs, essentially. Nitrogen is, the sort of base substance that you need. And so it's this huge big deal that they figured out how to do this. And it changes the way that humans have engaged in war ever since has been even more dreadful than it was before that. It unleashed just a vast amount of destruction in terms of human on human violence, the Haber-Bosch process, because, the bombs now that they can make are just like hellish kind of things. But a lot of the scientists stood up and took notice, because throughout the 19th century, you've got all kinds of people saying, we are running out of nitrogen. We've destroyed our soil. There's not really any left to take. We've pretty much done the whole planet. What are we going to eat? This is going to be a major, major problem. This is going to collapse. There's not going to be any food. So the Haber-Bosch process comes along and everybody heaves this sigh of relief. Oh, thank God we've got nitrogen again. Now, never mind that we're also going to run out of oil and gas. Like that didn't seem to enter into the equation, that like these things are actually finite. It didn't matter, because at least for now we can solve this problem. So along comes this process called the Green Revolution. So by adding this chemically produced nitrogen to the soil and breeding plants to be as small as they could possibly be. So you're trying to get rid of the stuff that we don't need, that we don't want as humans, and then making the seed head as large as those tiny little stalks could possibly support. You could, in fact, quadruple the amount of food that was produced. And that's what happened. And in response, the human population also quadrupled. I don't actually see this as a net positive, because at the end of the day, we're still faced with the same problem, which is there's too many people. We're running out of soil. Now we're also running out of oil and gas. This collapse is still coming. We just put it off for a few decades, and we've actually made it 4 times worse. Like instead of just pulling back from this activity, we just went full in. So that was the Green Revolution. So now here we are. And I'm still going to say that the solution to all of this is to simply stop doing it, that we need to shrink our footprint. We need to shrink the number of people. We can do this in ways that support human rights completely. This has already been proven around the world. We know how to do it. It's a political problem. It's not a problem of chemistry or physics. It's not a problem of human nature. It's just the political institutions that are driving this. And this is what we need to face. Anyway, here's your plate. Is there a dead animal on it, or is there not a dead animal on it? That's not actually the question. The question is dramatically larger, because there are dead animals involved no matter what you're eating. This was the thing I did not want to face as a vegan. If you are eating a pile of rice, you've got so many dead rivers, I don't even know how to count them. And you've got all the fish that used to live there. You've got all the marine life at the dead zone at the bottom of that river. All of that's gone. And it's not just one individual animal, it's entire species. 200 species every single day. That's what's being destroyed to eat your vegan food. Whoever's eating that food, I don't care if you're a vegan or not. If you're eating agricultural food, that's the cost, is the entire planet. And I'm going to contrast with the kind of food that I assume you eat and that I know I eat, which is as much as I possibly can, the grass-based, perennial-based farming that involves ruminants on grass. It's exactly the opposite. You're repairing the soil, you're repairing the habitat, you're repairing the water table, you're sequestering vast amounts of carbon. Like, there really is hope for our planet. And you're also repairing local economies. You're repairing all the social relationships. All of that can happen by simply eating one cow a year. And it's one life. It's not the entire planet, and it's a way of eating that actually supports the cycle of life rather than destroying it. And that's really our only option. This was the hardest thing for me. We don't have a death-free option. And I tried to grow my own food, and I learned the hard way. There was no way to do it without killing. And that was very, very hard on me as a vegan to come to terms with that. And I made my own peace with it in, my own sort of sneaky way, which was that I got chickens and ducks. I was like, fine, they'll do the killing for me. But I was lying to myself. Come on, somebody had to kill those insects and those other animals. So fine, I let somebody else do it for me, but it was still happening. And so those were the things that I couldn't face. Anyway, I'm kind of on a ramble now. I'm not sure whether I've answered your question or not, but
there's been a few moments in my podcasting where I've said to my guests that I feel like taking this mic in front of me and dropping it, and this is another one of them. So I really appreciate those, especially coming from you, and how profound, as I mentioned, the book is. It was interesting, Lierre, as we sort of segue and move over to the nutritional side of things, from a plant-based argument to, adding animal foods back in the diet. But initially, I should have talked about what you found out is that, for something to live, something else has to die. You mentioned that. And again, I should have thought about myself dying, because my health was so poor. I literally looked and felt like I was dying. My hair was falling out. My skin was cracking, nails falling out, brain fog, dental issues. I was down to 127 pounds at my lightest. I looked emaciated. I lost my job. My testosterone was in the toilet. I couldn't procreate, all the things we know. Right. And we'll get into a little bit more. We share something in our dear friend of betaine HCl now, which I found.
Yes, me too.
So we share that in common. So when I heard you say it, I was like, oh my gosh, I have a fellow gastroparesis person here.
Yes, right.
Oh my goodness, Lierre. But, thinking about that, I should have really been putting two and two together, but in my brain fog state, I was literally dying. So I had to add animal foods back in, but I came from it from the angle that I first found Sally K. Norton, and the fact that plants defended themselves was just unbeknownst to me. So again, we'll get into this nutritional argument with lectins and stuff like that, but that was what I found. And then I found Dr. Baker on Joe Rogan talking about the benefits of animal foods. But then later on, I've had this come up, Lierre, is that I've been questioned a few times by folks, obviously, that are still either entrenched in the vegan diet or thinking about animal foods back in. But I told them that I have never thought about what is on my plate more profoundly than since I added animal foods back in, even as a vegan, because like yourself, I did not appreciate what it took to get those foods to my plate. And one of the best things I heard you say is, the question, does your food build topsoil or destroy it?
Right.
But it's just an incredible thing when you start to think about that appreciation for where your food is coming from. So thank you for that. And folks, the book is The Vegetarian Myth. Make sure I'll put links in the show notes to get it. Lierre goes into all kinds of detail in the book, including her now infamous story of her slugs in her garden, which I won't get her to repeat today, but you can read about it in the book. But
everybody loves that story. They're like, tell us that story.
It is such a great story. And I know a mutual friend of ours, Casey Ruff from Boundless Body, he absolutely adores that story. And that's where, ironically, I really first heard it. To heal myself, I listened to podcasts. That's why I'm doing what I do today, because I want to get it back out there. And I heard your first interview with Casey when I was sitting there going, I was like, oh my goodness, I know whenever I start this, I've got to speak to this lady. So full circle, here we are today.
Aww.
So again, thank you. Nutritionally, though, you've
Yeah,
heard a couple of things that happened to me. I really want to dive into this because what has been profoundly helpful has been sharing my, especially
sure.
coming from a male perspective, which is wanting in this area so
Yeah,
badly. I mean, we
yeah,
have a
yeah.
lot of women out there that are, but the men, for whatever this machismo thing where they don't want to tell about what happened to them. I've told the listeners before, my testosterone left me, my libido left me, my brain fog. It was
Mm,
a very serious state. So, Lierre, you mentioned your degenerative disc disease that was,
yeah.
you now know thanks to your past dietary choices. What else happened? We talked, there's quite a bit.
Well, yeah, the first thing that happened, I would say, would be the blood sugar issues, which I had no idea what it was. I just knew that even just a few months in, starting this vegan diet, just eating nothing but sugar, um, which I did not know was sugar. I mean, that's how silly the whole thing is. I thought it was, oh, it's complex carbohydrate. That's the good thing to eat. That keeps you from being diabetic. Like half my family's diabetic. Everybody gets type 2. Like we're totally those people, you know. I was the last person in the world who should have been doing this crazy diet, but I didn't know that. So, we were told in school, and of course I read all the books, complex carbohydrate. That's the way you do it. That will keep your blood sugar steady. Yay, complex carbs. And that entire time I was vegan, I really want people to understand this. I did not once eat white sugar. I did not once eat white rice. If I was even like at a restaurant, which was rare, if there was white rice, it was like, oh no, I can't eat that. It's white. I have to can only eat the brown rice. I wouldn't eat like jelly if it had sugar in it. Like it's a pile of fruit. What do you think it is? But it was like, no, there's sugar. That's the bad thing. No white flour. Everything was whole grain, whole bean, all of it. Like I was so super strict about this. It doesn't matter. It's all just sugar at the end of the day. Nobody told me that. So a few months in, I was having these like horrible episodes, which I now understand were the blood sugar crash. So for anybody who's not onto this yet, what happens is you eat a pile of sugar. Now you can call it complex carbohydrate if it makes you feel better. But I'm telling you, it's not going to make you feel better physically because it's a pile of sugar. The point of digestion is it gets broken down. That's the only way it's going to cross over the brush border through your intestines into your bloodstream. It has to be broken down into tiny little pieces. So for carbohydrate, that means sugar. It's broken up into simple sugars. That's what your body does with it. So now you've got a load of sugar and it's all entered your bloodstream. And it might be 2 minutes slower than white sugar, but it's still sugar at the end of the day, and your body has to deal with it. It's all just sugar. In it comes. Now what happens? Oh, it's a biological emergency because our brains, especially, can only survive inside a really narrow range of blood sugar. If it's too high or too low, you can fall into a coma and die. It's not a joke. This happens to diabetics. Yeah, it's very scary. And your body, your brain is like, what the hell? I can't do this. So it's an emergency. And the emergency response is insulin. Your pancreas will release this huge, sort of wad of insulin comes streaming in to your blood, and it grabs everything that it can. It's a very blunt instrument. Okay, this is how I know we were not designed to do this. It's a really blunt, it's like a sledgehammer, and it grabs everything that it can out of your bloodstream and it shoves it into your fat cells for storage as fast as it can. Just get it out of your bloodstream so your brain doesn't collapse. Without our brains, we're dead. So that's the emergency response. But because it's an emergency response, it's not finely tuned. So now, of course, having grabbed everything and shoved it out of the way, that insulin is not doing you any favors because you're now too low. So that narrow range, you've done the roller coaster. Now you're on the way down. Now you're too low. So now your blood sugar is too low. And this is what I was experiencing just a few months in, was this horrible feeling of I need to eat something. And if I don't eat something, I felt like I was going to die. It was like, it just felt like life or death. And I'd be shaking, a little sweaty, and like, I'm going to cry, kind of like, this is just not right. It's not right. I need to eat. So I would eat another, what do you know, load of complex carbohydrate. And it was a little bit puzzling at first because I had never really felt this before and I didn't know what it was. And I'd never heard it described before. And so I just accepted it as life. Like, all right, well, this is just how it is. And I would feel better when I ate that little bit of whatever came next, in my carbohydrate day. But then it would happen again 2 hours later. And the problem, of course, is that if you do this over and over again, I mean, it's one thing to eat a little bit of honey once a year or twice a year as a hunter gatherer, you might do that. But I was doing this 3, 4 times a day. And then it was 5 or 6 times a day. And then it was 8 times a day. And by the end of my life as a vegan, I was eating every 20 minutes. I mean, it was just a constant stream of little nibbles of food so that I didn't fall over and die. And it's a ridiculous way to live. And I see people in my life now who still live this way. Like you plan whatever the meeting is for this thingy that we're whatever. Like, no, we have to have a snack at 10 o'clock. And they say, because of my blood sugar. I'm like, oh, sweetheart, you don't have to do this. I can fix you if you'll just listen to me. You don't have to hell. You don't have to live like this. You can go hours without even thinking about food. I guarantee you will feel better. But you got to stop eating the carbohydrate. It's just all it is. You just got to stop. There's a few hard days in there. The first 3, 4 days is honestly rough, but then you're over it. Because, of course, Pavlov's dogs, you've essentially trained your pancreas to release insulin every time you put food in your mouth. Your pancreas has to realize, oh, it's fine. You don't actually need me anymore. And it can rest, the poor thing. Anyway, that's the blood sugar problem. So that happened right away, and that only got worse and worse. And at this point, I have no insulin receptors left. I just slaughtered those poor babies. I mean, it's just done. Some people can resensitize their insulin receptors. If you haven't done exactly what I did for as long as I did, you might be able to get some of that back. But in my case, no. If I stray even a tiny bit from the plan here, I will feel it. I'm not saying I don't ever binge on chocolate once in a while, but it's not a life plan. I can't do it. I feel so sick for 48 hours afterwards. So I just can't. It's done. It's a done deal. It's like they're fried. So your insulin, it locks into, there's a receptor on the surface of the cell. So it's like a key fitting into a lock. And if you have a really old key, you know that it wears down and it stops working. So, and then you have to replace the whole thing. And that's what happens over time if you just keep abusing the system. So that's number one. That was the first problem that I had. Probably second problem was the dry skin, and the dry hair. And I got this sort of gray, sallow complexion. I mean, I was 16, 17 years old. I should have looked all like lovely and rosy and like, oh, mate with me. And I didn't. I was just like corpse. That happened pretty fast too. And that's just basically not having any animal fats. Some proteins as well. You need collagen in there to like make your skin happen. But when I gave up being the vegan, the first thing that I started to eat again was eggs. So I called myself like vegan plus eggs because I got onto the low carb thing before I figured out that the whole vegan thing was just a disaster. And so that was about 2 years when I tried to do low carb, but still be a vegan. And that was really rough because the only thing you can eat is soy and some nuts. I mean, that was, and what's that stuff that's made out of gluten? The seitan, that like fake meat.
Oh,
It's
I think
just pure, literally pure gluten. That's what it is, right? So I ate that a lot, and of course soy. I just lived on soy. So I did. And the blood sugar problems were way better eating the low carb and a lot of peanut butter, but dramatically worse on every other front because of course that soy was just like the worst possible thing I could have been eating. Anyway, yeah, but I started eating eggs at that point because it was like there just was nothing to eat. And within 2 days of eating eggs every day, I woke up one morning and looked in the mirror. I could not believe how different I looked. My skin just was transformed overnight from eating the eggs, a little bit of animal fat, a little bit of animal protein. And I had spent 20 years, every time I moved my arms and legs, my skin hurt because it couldn't bend, which I don't know. I didn't even think about it. It was just something I was so used to. I figured it was just life. And I could actually move my arms and legs and it didn't hurt. Like my skin flexed when I moved the way it's supposed to. It was a miracle. Just eggs alone did that for me. Yeah, and I remember just that day just running back to the mirror, like I look completely different. Like my skin was like, what the hell? This is amazing. Anyway, eggs, eat eggs. So that happened pretty much right away, and that just got worse and worse. And also I was living in New England in Massachusetts, and it was so cold and so dry in the winter. I mean, my skin was bleeding by February. It hurt so bad it kept me up at night. That's how dry it was. This went on for years, and I just thought, oh well, I have dry skin. I don't know. No moisturizer helped because it's internal. It's not external. So really, the barrier didn't help. I needed things I didn't have in my skin. So that happened pretty quickly on. And of course, the dry hair. I didn't lose my hair. I know people who lost their hair. It didn't ever really get thin, but it was so dry. So that happened. And then 2 years in, I started to get this very strange pain in my spine. And it took me years to actually get a diagnosis. Part of that is that they didn't have MRIs in the 1980s, so there really wasn't a way to get a diagnosis. And the other thing was I was just simply too young. That they weren't taking me seriously because like your spine isn't supposed to fall apart when you're 18, and I hadn't been in an accident, so there was no precipitating incident. I was like, there's a mystery. We've got no idea. Finally, I did end up getting an MRI in 1995, so 15 years on. And they're like, oh, well, this is not a mystery. Your spine's completely falling to pieces here. I'm like, all right, fine, good. Yeah, here we go. That you don't get that one back. It's your joints, that level of degeneration is, you can reduce the inflammation, which I have done very dramatically. So I'm in a lot less pain than I was. The year 2000 was when I started eating, or 1999, end of that was when I started eating meat again, and or animal products anyway, and then meat very soon after that. And it took a few years, but I'm in dramatically less pain than I was just from eating, more to the human template. The omega-6s, omega-3s, like all of that definitely plays a role in the level of pain that you might experience. But for some of us, this is permanent. Your joints are very poorly vascularized. That includes, your spine, the joints there. Once they have achieved that level of injury, they don't build back. So that's a done deal. And I highly encourage people not to do this to themselves. Like, if I wanted fentanyl, I can get it. Like, that's the level of, they just look at yeah, okay, what do you want? Like, we can do nothing for you. Like, I know. And I don't want fentanyl. I was on fentanyl for 2 years, just FYI. At the end of my vegan life, the pain was so extraordinary. It was like, I'll take whatever I can get. I mean, pretty much just lived lying on the couch. I mean, I could barely stand up. It hurt so bad. And now it's like, I mean, I can stand up for 20 minutes. I can sit for hours at a time and I barely notice it. I've gotten a lot better, and then going carnivore, it was interesting to me. I wasn't expecting a change, but it was like another notch or two of pain relief just from the plant lectins and, the oxalates. Those accumulate in your joints. So that I was a surprise. I was not expecting. I got some miracles from carnivore, but that was a minor miracle for me for sure. Anyway, that happened. So that was 2 years in. And throughout that sort of 2 year period, my menstruation just basically came to a halt. So there's just like, no way you're getting a baby, honey. And now I understand. And the thing to know is that poor cholesterol is this really life affirming substance. We need to eat it. If we don't eat it, our livers are, tasked with making it, but we really cannot make enough that is for what our body requires. And cholesterol is like the mother substance. It's the mother hormone. It's what we build all our hormones from. It's what we need to build every hormone in your body. And that includes your sex hormones. So animal bodies have this amazing thing that if there's some kind of a disaster or an emergency, we have ways to shut off things that aren't needed now, and we'll deal with it later. So for instance, there's a lion coming towards you and you need to run. You will get a huge hit of adrenaline. And what adrenaline does is it will drive all the energy in your body as fast as it can to your large muscles so that you can do fight or flight, because you might need to pound that lion. You might need to run from that lion, climb a tree really fast. But I don't know whether we can outclimb lions on a tree. I've got no idea, but you might have to try it if you don't know what lions are capable of. You can't outclimb a bear. I know that. There's bears where I live. We see them all the time, but there's no point in climbing a tree. They can climb faster than you. So there's ways to deal with bears. I'm actually friends with a lot of the bears. I'm not afraid of them, but if you did need to run from a bear, you don't want to climb a tree. Anyway, that's what adrenaline does. It's its main thing, is to just drive that insulin into your muscles. And what it means is it shuts down everything else. So you don't want to be using energy to digest your food. You can handle that later. But that's why under high stress, like, if somebody suddenly has a gun to your head, or, if you're on the front line of a battle, like really high stress, life threatening situations that humans find themselves in, what adrenaline does in that moment. I mean, you hear about this. You just evacuate your bowels. I mean, people have that's what happens. You might urinate down your leg if in states of extreme terror. That's what will happen to people. That's what adrenaline does. It clears everything out so that you can run or fight. So adrenaline is not something you want to be doing to yourself every day. And okay, that's the adrenaline thing. I want to go back to the hormones first. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because you have a way in your body to shut things down when you don't need them so that you can use the energy for other things. If you're not eating enough cholesterol, you need hormones just to keep you alive moment to moment. You don't necessarily need your sex hormones on a moment to moment basis. In fact, your body is making a very wise decision in saying, it looks to me like we're starving here. Might not be a good time to reproduce. We're shutting that shit down. You need hormones right now just to keep you going from moment to moment. You let us know when you find some better food, or when it's the end of winter. When the famine is over, we can talk about the sex hormone business. But until then, you're not getting any sex hormones. So all of that gets shut down. And instead, your body just keeps you alive. This is what happens when you don't eat enough cholesterol. If you don't have enough to go around, you're not going to get any sex hormones out of it. And this is why your testosterone collapsed. It's why my estrogen collapsed. It's why I didn't menstruate, for 20 years. Without enough animal fat, without enough cholesterol, you're just not going to get the juiciness of life. And your body is making the correct decision to just shuttle that off. So that was it for me. I mean, it just wasn't going to happen. The only thing good for me in this story is that I did not actually want to have a baby, but that would have been really heartbreaking, and I've met so many women who, this is such a thing, where they cannot get pregnant and they don't know why. And I'm sitting here like chewing, like, I can fix this for you. It's like 90% of the time, it's like, all you need to do is take out the industrial seed oils. Please, dear God, do not ever eat soy again, and eat some animal fat. I promise you, like, it's so likely that will fix your problem. And it's just really hard because, like, people don't want to hear it. They're still caught up in the low fat, high carb, whatever thing. Especially if they've got an ideological attachment to it. It's like, uh, if you let me talk to you and you're willing to engage, there's so much I can tell you about this. And it's so likely that I will be able to fix this. You just give it 6 months on this diet, you could have the best baby ever. And so many of them don't want to hear it. So anyway, that's what happened to me. So yeah, we just shut that part down. So, okay, we've already sort of mentioned how plants fight back. Soy is really great at this because it has things that look very much like animal hormones. They're not quite, but they look very much like it. So your body will take them up as if it's estrogen, and then it will block the actual estrogen from doing its job in your body. And so every time you eat soy, you're actually not getting the estrogen that you do need, and you're getting this sort of faux estrogen that, in fact, does really bad things to you. And so between the soy and the not having any animal fat, that was just it. It was just my reproductive organs were just, on ice. And I know this for a fact because I started eating, the animal, got off the vegan thing, started eating meat, and I started to get somewhat of a menstrual cycle back, but it was still kind of wonky. And then I stumbled into the Western price stuff, and I really did a deep dive into soy, exactly what was wrong with soy. And I was really horrified because I was still eating a lot of soy at that point. And, it's one of those moments where you think, what have I done to myself? Because I was really eating that, especially that last 2 years of my vegan, when I was still trying to be low carb and all, it was just soy all the time. And I was like, yeah, boy, everything got so much worse. Like my spine got dramatically worse. Everything got dramatically worse when I was eating the soy. So I went cold turkey on it. I was like, all right, I have to accept this was a bad thing that I did. We're not eating it anymore. No more soy. And within a few weeks, I got my period. And then from that point forward, and I'm not exaggerating, it was every 28 days. You could have set your clock by it until I hit menopause. And this was after 20 years of barely menstruating. It was like boom, 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 boom. And I was like, what did I do to myself? That one was so dramatic. So the soy, I'm telling you, take the soy out. Soy is not food, it's a drug. It is a drug. And the soybean knows what it's doing. It says, you eat me, I'm going to make sure you don't get any babies. It's like the best kind of chemical warfare you could do on an animal. You eat this, oh yeah, you're going to be so sorry. I mean, along with all the other stuff that soy does, the stomach aches and the trypsin inhibitors and like all the other things, it is very, very good at making sure it will not get eaten because you're not going to reproduce if you eat it. Was there anything else? Yeah, I had the depression, the anxiety, the exhaustion, all of that, like, your brain is just completely unstable all the time. And I say this as an example, but it was really true. If I couldn't find my wallet or my keys, it was like massive disaster. And I would just sit on the floor and cry. It was like there was no balance in my brain. It was nothing. I could handle nothing. Any little stressor was just, I can't do it. It's just terrible. It's like now it's like, all right, I'll find my keys. Who cares? Like they're here somewhere. They didn't walk away on their own. But I just remember a time I was just sitting on the floor on the floor. Like I couldn't even make it to a chair. I would just sit on the floor, just collapse and cry because I couldn't find my wallet. Like you should have just a little more bounce in your brain to be a functioning adult in this world. Like it's not like I was two, it's like I was a grown-up person. So that's between the blood sugar problems. That will do that to you. You have mentioned the betaine. Yeah, I am now on betaine too, pretty much forever. So that adrenaline that we talked about, yes, it shuts down your digestive process. So every time that you're on that blood sugar roller coaster, one of one of the hormones that your body needs, one of the substances it will use to keep you alive is adrenaline. So on the bottom part of that kind of emergency that you're in, now you're going to be making adrenaline to keep that going. So you will burn out your adrenal glands, but in the presence of all that adrenaline on a constant daily 6 times a day basis, you're shutting down your stomach's capacity to produce hydrochloric acid, or your pancreas, whatever makes it. And so I've just permanently damaged my capacity to make acid. And it sounds like you've done the same thing. And this is why this condition that we have is called gastroparesis. Diabetics are the ones who get that. And I don't think I quite got to diabetes level, but I was really close by the time I was done. And that's why it's the adrenaline just constantly shutting down your body's capacity to make hydrochloric acid, because your body thinks you're in a state of an emergency, which you're not. But you are biologically in a state of emergency. And that's why adrenaline is called into this picture to keep you alive. And so, having done this permanent damage, I now take betaine hydrochloride every day. And it completely cleared that up. But I don't know about you. It wasn't quite 20 years, but I would say 16 years of that, the last chunk of that vegan, the bulk of it anyway. I just felt nauseated all the time. Like, the only time I did not feel sick to my stomach was if I didn't eat for like 2 days. And then it would finally clear. There was enough that it would finally empty my stomach. But I've met a lot of people who have done this to themselves as well. And I'm like, ooh, I can fix you. This is an easy one. Just go to the store, buy this stuff. It's over the counter. Just take it and you will feel so much better. You may have to take it forever, though, depending on how long you did this crazy thing to yourself. So
Let me just tell you that something came to me whilst you were talking about soy in particular, and it's a story that I've never shared with the listeners before. About 3 years into my vegan journey, I was sent to a conference, and I was a very strong advocate for the diet, to the point where the conference was catered. It was a one where we had to get a accreditation at the end of it, and none of the food was vegan. So I literally put together all my own food and brought it to the
of
conference.
course, yeah.
And then the lecturer, because of how often I needed to eat, think back
Uh-huh.
to your insulin
Yeah.
resistance type
Yeah.
discussions there and burning out my receptors. I was literally eating every 45 minutes. And
Yeah.
he, at one point, and I had all my stuff laid out in front of me on my desk, and he paused and he said, "Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, James has to eat again. We're just going to pause for a minute." And I went, "Oh, I'm so sorry."
Oh
And
God.
do you know that after he said that and stopped the lecture, I actually broke down into a puddle of tears and excused myself. He felt
Of
so
course
bad.
you did.
I did. Of course I
Of
did.
course you did.
And he came out to me, and to his credit, and I never remembered this till now, he said, "James, I couldn't help but notice you're drinking a carton of soy milk." And at the beginning stages, I was heavily into soy.
Oh
He said,
yeah.
and he said, let me just tell you, I'm not a vegan. I admire what you're doing, but I also, because of a lactose intolerance, switched to a lot of soy in my diet. And he said, I noticed that I start to develop breasts as a man. He's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I literally, he said, so I'm
Yeah.
warning you. He said, if
Yeah.
there's nothing else I can do, and God bless him now, I would get you to switch from soy. So I at least listened to that. My
Good.
downfall was I switched to completely almond milk, and the high oxalate bomb that was, and destroyed my gut. So I still
Yeah.
ended up losing there. It was, anyway, I
It's
just wanted,
all terrible stuff.
it
None of it's
is.
edible. It's not edible.
No, no. And as you so succinctly put it, and on a prior podcast, and it's something I wanted to talk to you about, Lierre, was if you had ever experienced this. You mentioned that the soil is in a drawdown state now. You also mentioned that vegans, even though at the beginning stages, they're in a health drawdown because of the dietary
Yeah.
choices.
Yep.
So I wondered, like myself and like so many others, if you had experienced any of that sort of bliss at the beginning stages, where you probably cut out, like I did, a lot of the processed foods, and felt pretty good for a while at the first beginning stages of your veganism. And as I talk to more people as they go along, the deficiencies rear their ugly head. Did that ever happen to you on your journey?
I didn't really have that because I was not a big junk food person. My mother was not, she wasn't like super strict, but like we didn't have candy and chocolate lying around the house. And we never had soda. So there were like real lines that she drew about, we're not just buying junk. Nobody needs more sugar, like kind of things. And so I had already, I think I had a pretty good head on my shoulder, even as a teenager. Like I just didn't drink soda. Yeah. So I wasn't like a big junk food person. So when I went vegan, it wasn't, I didn't really get that a lot of people get, where it's like, oh my God, I felt so great for 6 months. I didn't really feel that. I felt pretty the same until the blood sugar stuff started, which was pretty early on. For me, it was more like an emotional, spiritual sort of high, like, oh, I'm doing this really great thing. And okay, it sets me apart from everybody, but I don't care because I'm going to do the right thing. So I felt very righteous, and there's definitely something that comes with that is, I mean, for good and for bad. Like, you want people to feel good about doing the good thing, but also there's a way that you can get, sort of self-righteous about that. And that now you're a proselytizer and nobody wants to hear that. So, there's a balance there between feeling like I'm a good, conscientious person and I'm an obnoxious brat. Like, I'm, I'm not sure that I always sort of, was on the right side of that line throughout my vegan days. But no, I can't say that I felt that initial rush of health did not happen to me. I absolutely believe that it happens to other people, because if you're taking out a lot of the junk food, I wasn't eating at McDonald's. Like, there wasn't a lot of like junk for me to clear out. So I didn't really get that.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. And, you mentioned the mental stuff as well, the depression and anxiety. I was rife with it at the end there, Lierre, to the point where my GP wanted to put me on antidepressants. And I was trying to explain to him, but I've never been depressed in my life. But he says, yeah, but you're clearly showing signs of it. And
Yeah.
now looking back, and you mentioned, since going carnivorous, or sort of that next level, we often, and the people I speak to, call it the carnivore zen, where you're just
Yeah.
calm now,
Calm.
steady Eddie all the way. I just feel like nothing can rock me, no matter whereas before, like you said, puddle on the floor if the cup
Yeah.
spilt, like that's it.
And even being low carb did a lot of that for me. But honestly, going carnivore, there was a whole nother, I don't know how to describe it. There was this whole other level that happened in my brain where it was like, wow, I just feel so solid. And it just, yeah, I was not expecting anything more to happen emotionally. And it did. So plants really are trying to kill us.
So true. Lierre, I'm so conscious of our time today. I want to thank you for taking the time out. Also, I want to let the listeners know that I hope that we can do this again, because as I mentioned to you, I have a ton of other things that I'd love to talk to you about on this subject. But in parting, I just wanted to leave them with a little bit of hope. I mean, we've talked about the state of our planet a little bit, and the state of our soil in particular, and what's happening and what has caused this sort of shift with agriculturalism into this plant-based vegan way of eating that is clearly bad for our health. What can you leave the listeners with in terms of hope? I know, speaking to a lot of the folks out there, just this little sort of grassroots, pun intended, movement that we have going on now with people looking towards regenerative agriculture, and like myself, looking towards purchasing grass-fed ruminant meat and getting their health back, which also leads to getting their mind back, which
Right.
then leads you to start thinking about the bigger picture. What can you leave them with?
I don't think it's too late. I think we can still sequester the carbon. I think we can still repair the dead rivers. I think we can grow the soil back, but we have to stop doing agriculture. So there's a lot of great resources now that will walk you through this and that will get you hooked up into these movements if you want to be part of it. Even if you just want to buy the right food, there's great websites that can tell you where to get it if you want to participate, even on that level. It's important. That every dollar you spend at a local farm is a dollar that's not going into some huge corporate coffer somewhere, and that is going to help the people who are literally on the ground doing that repair. So go to eatwild.com, and they have a state-by-state breakdown of grass-based farms. And she's also written a few books. Her name's Jo Robinson. She's written a few good books that will explain to you why this is important and how to do it right. I would also highly recommend Sacred Cow by Diana Rogers. There's a book and a movie that you can watch about that. Also, Alan Savory is sort of the main guy here who figured a lot of this out. He has an amazing TED Talk, really easy to watch, and he will walk you through the millions of acres now that are where people are using his methods to restore habitat, repair the earth, repair the waterways. Like, there's now rivers in Africa that are 10 miles longer than anybody even knew they could be. That's how much water they've been able to hold in the soil by simply letting the grasses and the ruminants come home. And that's all we have to do is stop destroying, and it will come home. And that includes us. We get to go home. So be part of this instead. This is the life affirming thing that we need to be doing. And yeah, find the better information because it's out there. So I would start with those resources, and then you can write to James, you can write to me, and we'll tell you more good things. So
I'll make sure to put all those links in the show notes, in addition to your website, in addition to where they can find the book. I'll make sure that's all there. And I just want to, because it literally, and again, thank you for your getting on so early with me this morning where you're at in the world. I'm a little further ahead in the time zones, but I wanted, because it is close to breakfast or just around the breakfast in your time, and you end your chapter to save the world in the vegetarian myth with talking about breakfast throughout it. So I just wanted to finish with this last quote from the last succinct, impactful paragraph, and that read, "To save the world, we must know it. We must face where the damage lies, what human activities in whatever mixture of hubris and ignorance have done, no matter what it means to our identities, our securities, and our dreams." And I just want to say thank you, Lierre, for writing this book. It's an absolute honor and privilege to have you on here today. I just really mean that from the bottom of my heart, to the things we share similarly in our journey, to the advocacy work you've done. It's a pleasure to chat with you, and I'm looking forward to the next time we are able to do it again.
Well, thank you. And thank you for all your hard work in the world too. It's going to take all of us. So thanks for being part of it.
Thank you, Lierre. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And that's a wrap on this episode of Carnivorist Chats. If you've made it this far, I want to say thank you for listening, and also thank you in advance for liking, subscribing, or sharing this episode. Thanks again to Equip Foods, Carnivore Snacks, and the Carnivore Bar. Don't forget to check the link in the show notes to get a discount on their products. Until the next time, be well,